My name's Helen Carter. I'm 65 years old, retired from teaching second grade, and until last year I thought my life was perfectly ordinary. My husband Frank and I live in a small town called Maplewood, Oregon. It's quiet here, too quiet if you ask Frank, but I like it. We spend our mornings drinking coffee on the porch, complaining about the local news and pretending we're still young enough to fix things around the house. Frank's the kind of man who can fix anything except his hearing. He's been a carpenter his whole life, still smells like sawdust and old varnish. I always said I'd never have to worry about furniture breaking as long as he's alive. Our neighbours call us the steady couple, which really means we've stayed married long enough to outlast everyone else on the street. We raised 3 kids, Daniel, Laura and Michael. Daniel was the oldest, the kind of son every mother brags about. Kind, patient, always the first to call on holidays. Michael, the youngest, moved across the country years ago for work and visits when he can. And then there's Laura, my daughter, the one who used to bake me birthday cakes shaped like apples because I was a teacher, the one who'd hug me so tight when she wanted something that I'd almost forget to say no. Back then, I didn't see any warning signs. She had a nice job at a small accounting firm, married a decent man named Tom, and lived about 40 minutes away. She called often, told me about her co-workers, her dog, and her plans to have kids once life settles down. She sounded happy. We all did. Our house was our pride and joy. Frank built it himself in the 70s. Every piece of wood in that place has a story. There's the kitchen table he made when Daniel was born, the porch swing where Laura once fell asleep after prom, the stairs Michael nearly broke sneaking out one night. It's not just a house, it's a museum of our lives. Every Sunday, Frank and I hosted dinner. My sister June would bring her famous potato salad that everyone secretly hated, and the kids would show up pretending they weren't still fighting about politics. It was chaotic, loud, real. The kind of family life you see in commercials and assume nobody actually has. Then one spring afternoon, the phone rang. I was grading old lesson plans. I still do that sometimes out of habit. And Laura's voice came through, too cheerful. "Hey, Mom," she said. "How are you and Dad doing? I was thinking maybe I should come stay with you guys for a while." I didn't even think twice. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She told me things hadn't been great with Tom and that she needed time to reset. I told her she could have her old room back, the one still covered in posters of boy bands that probably broke up before she hit 30. Frank looked less thrilled. He mumbled something like, "She's a grown woman, Helen. What's she resetting from?" But I brushed him off. A mother always wants to believe her child just needs love, not supervision. When Laura arrived 2 days later, she looked thinner, paler. Her once perfect hair was tied in a messy bun, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Still, she smiled that sweet, practiced smile I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, Dad," she said, wrapping her arms around us. "I missed you guys so much." For a moment, I believed her. We all did. The first week felt almost normal. She helped with groceries, cooked dinner, even laughed at Frank's terrible jokes. But she asked a lot of questions, too many really, about the house, about the insurance, about our savings. I figured it was just her practical side. She's always been detail-oriented. That's what made her good at numbers. Then I noticed she'd started organising our mail to help you keep things tidy. One morning, Frank couldn't find his bank statement. Laura handed it to him with a smile and said she'd already paid the utility bill. Frank thanked her, but when she left the room, he leaned toward me and whispered, "I didn't ask her to." I laughed it off. "She's just trying to help," I said. Frank frowned. "Help is one thing, access is another." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there thinking how strange it was that our daughter, the same girl who once cried over a lost puppy, suddenly seemed in charge. Still, I told myself this was what family did. We looked out for each other. A few days later, while she and I were folding laundry, Laura mentioned something that caught me off guard. "Mom, you and Dad ever think about selling this place?" I laughed. "Sell it? We built our lives here." She shrugged. "It's a lot of work for 2 people your age. You could get a smaller house, maybe near me. I could help manage things." Her tone was sweet, but something in her eyes didn't match the smile. I remember thinking, why does she care so much about our house? Frank heard the conversation from the next room. Later, when Laura went to bed, he said, "You know, Helen, if I didn't know better, I'd say she's sizing up the place." I snapped at him. "Don't start, Frank. She's our daughter, not some stranger off the street." He sighed and muttered, "Sometimes that's worse." For the rest of the week, things carried on like normal. Coffee in the mornings, dinner together, polite small talk. But underneath it, I felt something shift, like a hairline crack you can't see until the whole thing splits apart. One evening, Laura walked in from work holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Just because," she said, handing them to me. I smiled, put them in a vase, and told her how thoughtful she was. That night, while cleaning up the kitchen, I found the receipt tucked inside her purse. She hadn't bought the flowers. They came free with a purchase at the insurance office in town. I don't know why that detail stuck with me. Maybe because it was the first time I realised that even kindness can have fine print. If you've ever had a family member who seemed too perfect, tell me about it in the comments. I'm curious how long it took you to notice something was off. And if you like hearing true family stories like this one, make sure you subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened next. Laura's smile grew brighter every day after that, but Frank's eyes grew darker. He was starting to see something I still refused to believe. The smell of those flowers stayed in the kitchen for days, a faint sweetness that made me uneasy. One night, while I was rinsing a cup, I caught myself staring at them and thinking about Daniel. Funny how grief sneaks back when you least expect it. 15 years should be enough time to heal, but it isn't. Not when the person you lost still shows up in your dreams, smiling like he did before everything went wrong. Daniel was 27 when he died. It was a Saturday, the kind of day you only remember in fragments. The sound of Frank's truck pulling out of the driveway, the coffee still warm on the counter, the ring of the phone that split my chest in half. They said it was an accident, a hiking trip with his sister, a misstep near the cliff at Silver Ridge. No foul play, no investigation needed, just bad luck. Frank came home from identifying the body looking 10 years older. He didn't cry, not once. He just sat on the porch that night, holding Daniel's old baseball cap, staring at the trees. I remember asking if he was okay, and he said, "He fell, Helen. That's what they're saying." Now, he fell. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. After the funeral, we barely spoke for weeks. I buried myself in work, the only thing that still made sense. Kids don't ask questions you can't answer. They just draw pictures and talk about their pets. Frank spent his days in the garage, building furniture he didn't need to sell. It was easier than talking about our son. Laura was quiet too. She came by, brought food, did the dishes. She said Daniel's death had changed her. "It makes you see what matters," she told me one night while wiping her eyes. "We have to stick together now." At the time, I thought she was just grieving. Now, looking back, that night feels heavier, like there was more in her voice than sadness. Something sharper underneath. The day after we buried Daniel, I found her in his room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at one of his old notebooks. When I asked what she was doing, she jumped. "Just looking through memories," she said. Her hands were trembling, but I thought it was from crying. She left a few minutes later, but she didn't take the notebook. I remember picking it up after she left. Inside were lists, expenses, savings goals, plans for a business. Daniel wanted to start with Frank. On the last page, written in his quick, messy handwriting, was a short note. "Laura's been acting strange. She keeps asking about the will. I think she's hiding something." I didn't show it to Frank. I couldn't. I told myself Daniel was just stressed, that he and Laura had always bickered. Siblings fight, families forgive. That's what I believed. A few years later, Frank mentioned that he'd seen something strange the week Daniel died. He said Laura had come home with a scrape on her arm, mud on her shoes, and she threw her jacket straight into the washer. I asked her where she'd been, he told me. She said she slipped on the driveway. He said it so casually, like it was a memory he didn't know what to do with. I told him to stop, to let it go. I said we'd lose her too if we kept digging into the past. He looked at me then, the way a man looks when he's already lost everything. "We already did, Helen," he said. "We just don't know it yet." I didn't want to believe him. I needed to believe Laura was good, that she loved her brother, that families don't destroy themselves over money. It was easier to believe in accidents than in monsters. Now, with her living under our roof again, I started seeing things I couldn't ignore. She still wore that same fake smile when she talked about Daniel, like the memory of him was a performance she had to rehearse. She kept calling it the accident, never his death. That's what caught me one evening when we were sitting in the living room. The news was on and they were talking about a local hiking rescue. She shook her head and said, "People really should be more careful near cliffs. It only takes one wrong step." Frank's hand tightened around his mug. Mine went cold. After she went to bed, I asked him what that meant. He looked at me and said, "You tell me, Helen. You were the one who said she needed forgiveness." That night, I dreamed of Daniel standing by the edge of that same ridge, looking down at something I couldn't see. He turned to me and said, "Mom, it wasn't an accident." I woke up with my heart racing, the bedsheet twisted around me like a rope. The next morning, I found Laura at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She smiled. "You look tired, Mom. Bad dreams?" I said nothing, just sat across from her. She looked perfectly calm, perfectly normal, maybe too perfect. Then she said, "I was thinking we should look into updating your will, just in case. You know, to make things easier down the line." My stomach turned. Frank walked in at that moment, heard her, and froze mid-step. "We'll think about it," he said, his voice flat. She just smiled and went back to her phone. The rest of the day felt like walking on thin ice. Every word, every look between us carried something unsaid. That evening, Frank went out to his workshop, stayed there for hours. When he came back, he smelled like sawdust and worry. He sat down beside me and said quietly, "I've seen that look before, Helen." The same one she had the week Daniel died. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't find the words. Frank took a deep breath. "You don't have to believe me. Just start paying attention." I nodded, pretending I understood, but the truth was, I didn't want to. Because if Frank was right, if that look really was the same, then the danger in our family had never left. It had only come home. Frank started locking his toolbox again. He hadn't done that in years. The sound of the latch clicking every night was small, but it said everything he didn't. Meanwhile, Laura kept playing the role of the devoted daughter. She'd kiss my cheek before work, compliment my cooking, and ask about our health as if we were one medical bill away from dying. One evening, she came home with takeout from some fancy restaurant in town. "You two deserve a treat," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "You shouldn't be cooking at your age." Frank laughed under his breath. At our age, we should have starved to death by now. Laura ignored him, busy arranging the plates like she was hosting a dinner party. She poured us each a glass of wine, smiled, and raised hers. "To family," she said. I drank because I wanted to believe her. Frank drank because he didn't. After dinner, Laura offered to take over the bills completely. "I can set up automatic payments," she said. "It'll be easier for you guys. You don't need to worry about remembering due dates." Frank stared at her. "We've remembered them for 40 years. She laughed. "Yeah, but now you have me." That night, after she went upstairs, Frank checked the bank website. He sat there staring at the screen for a long time, scrolling through transactions. Then he closed the lap, turned to me and said, "We're short about 20 grand. I froze. "That can't be right." He nodded slowly. "It's not missing, it's transferred. Guess who has access?" I said she must have made a mistake. Maybe she paid something twice. Maybe it was a glitch. Anything but what it looked like. Frank didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "Helen, sometimes the truth doesn't wait for permission." I couldn't sleep that night. I told myself I'd talk to Laura in the morning, but when she came downstairs, she was already dressed for work, hair done, smiling. I couldn't ruin that smile. Mothers don't want to be the first to break what still looks perfect. A few days later, Laura started bringing home groceries and paying cash for everything. "You don't have to worry about money anymore," she said cheerfully. "I've got everything under control." Frank shot me a look that said that's exactly what worries me. He decided to test her. He told her he'd gotten a call from the bank about unusual activity. She didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed and said, "Oh, that's probably me. I moved some funds around to get you better interest. You'll thank me later." It was the confidence that scared me, like she'd rehearsed the lie. That night, I found Frank out in the garage again. sitting in the dark. I asked what he was thinking, and he said, "I'm thinking I raised a stranger. I told him not to say things like that." "She's just trying to help," I insisted. He looked at me and said, "Helen, she's not helping, she's setting the table." The next day, Laura came home early with new paperwork. "It's for the taxes," she said. "It's complicated this year. You just need to sign here so I can file everything together." The pages were thick, full of legal words I didn't understand. I hesitated, but she smiled the way she used to when she was a little girl asking for an extra cookie. "Trust me, Mom," she said. "It's all standard." I wanted to believe that more than anything. Frank, though, refused to sign. He read every line with his glasses low on his nose. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "This isn't tax paperwork. This gives you joint ownership of the house." Laura's face didn't move. "So? It's easier that way." He put the papers down. "Easier for who?" She looked between us, tears suddenly forming. "Do you really think I'd hurt you? My own parents?" Frank said nothing, and the silence was enough of an answer. She stormed off, slamming her bedroom door so hard the walls shook. Later, I went upstairs to check on her. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, mascara smudged, staring at nothing. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. I hugged her, told her we loved her, that we just needed to understand what was happening. She didn't hug back. She just said, "You always take his side." That cut deeper than she knew. After she went to sleep, Frank came into our room holding a small recording device. "She's not telling us the truth," he said, "so I'm going to find out what the truth is." I told him it was too much, that he was being paranoid, that we weren't those kinds of people. He replied, "Maybe that's why she thinks she can get away with it." The next morning, Laura acted as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast, humming an old song from her teenage years. She even kissed Frank on the cheek before leaving for work. When she walked out, he turned to me and said, "You smell that?" I asked what he meant. "Smoke?" He said, "You just don't see the fire yet." That evening, she came home holding a box of photo albums. "Look what I found in the attic," she said. She sat with me at the table, flipping through old pictures of Daniel, Michael, and her. Her finger stopped on a photo of Daniel at Silver Ridge, smiling, his arm around her shoulders. She traced his face with her thumb and said quietly, "He shouldn't have gone that day." Frank was watching from across the room. "Why's that?" he asked. Laura's eyes flicked up. "Because it was raining. It wasn't safe." Frank's voice was calm but heavy. "Wasn't safe for who?" She stood up, closed the album, and said she was tired. That night, I caught Frank standing in the hallway outside her door, listening. He didn't say a word when he came back to bed. He just placed the recorder on his nightstand. In the morning, Laura greeted us with pancakes and coffee. She was cheerful again, like the night before had never happened. But when she leaned over to pour my coffee, her eyes met Frank's, and for the briefest second, the warmth disappeared. It was like watching someone drop a mask mid-performance. She smiled again, just as quickly. "You two really need to relax," she said, laughing lightly. "You worry too much." Frank didn't laugh. He just watched her walk away, that same look on his face he had the day Daniel died. Frank started keeping his phone in his pocket, even when he was home. I could hear the soft click of the recorder every time Laura came into the room. It became his way of breathing around her. Quiet, cautious, waiting for the next spark to hit powder. Laura, on the other hand, seemed lighter than ever. She'd bring home candles, fresh flowers, talk about redecorating the house. "You two deserve something new," she said one evening, waving colour swatches in my face. "You've been living in this museum for too long." I smiled politely, but my hands felt cold. That word, museum, stuck with me, like she already saw us as exhibits, not people. Later that week, she brought up the will again. This time, she came prepared. She had a thick folder, a calm smile, and a tone that sounded rehearsed. "I talked to a lawyer from my firm," she said, "and he said it's risky not to update things. You should really think about it." Frank was sanding a chair in the garage when she said it. He didn't even look up. "The only risk here is trusting people too easily." Laura laughed. "Dad, this isn't about trust. It's about responsibility. You two are getting older. What if something happens?" He looked up then, his eyes sharp. "Something like what?" Her smile faltered for just a second, but it was enough. You know what I mean? Accidents, health issues. I'm just trying to make sure everything's in order. Frank turned off the sander and wiped his hands. We'll think about it, he said, walking past her. But we didn't. That night, after she went to bed, Frank showed me his notes. He'd been writing everything down. Dates, conversations, amounts, even the expressions she made when she thought we weren't looking. If she pushes again, he said, we'll go straight to Albert. Albert Moore was an old friend of Frank's, a lawyer who handled local estate cases. He'd helped us buy our house 30 years ago. Frank trusted him like a brother. The next afternoon, Laura brought it up once more, this time in front of both of us. Why don't we just visit Albert together? She said cheerfully. He already knows you, right? Frank hesitated, caught off guard. She smiled sweetly. It's better to get it done properly than to leave things messy. I glanced at Frank, waiting for him to refuse, but he didn't. He simply nodded. Fine, he said. Let's make an appointment. I didn't understand his decision until we left the lawyer's office 2 days later. Albert greeted us warmly, unaware of the storm underneath. He listened, nodded, explained our options. Laura sat there, her face glowing with fake concern, her hand resting on mine. We could set up a trust, Albert suggested, or just update the will, make sure the assets go where you intend. Laura jumped in before I could speak. I think a trust makes sense. That way it's protected for everyone's future, especially me and the kids, of course. Frank's jaw tightened. Let's keep things simple, he said. Just a will, 50-50 between you and the grandkids. Laura frowned, pretending to think it over. Sure, but you can put me as the trustee, right? I'll handle everything when the time comes. Albert looked to us for approval. I hesitated. Frank didn't. Fine, he said quietly. It was the quietest fine I'd ever heard, the kind that means I know what you're doing. When it was over, Laura hugged Albert like she'd just saved our lives. You're doing the right thing, she said, squeezing my hand. This is how families protect each other. We signed the papers, posed for the picture the office required for documentation, and went home. The whole ride back, the car was silent except for the hum of the road. Once we pulled into the driveway, Frank didn't get out immediately. He just sat there staring through the windshield. You know what she's doing, right? He said. I nodded, even though my throat was too tight to speak. She's not protecting us, he said. She's building her case. That night we didn't talk about it again. We just watched TV in silence, pretending life was normal. But I noticed Frank had started sleeping with the garage light on. A few days later, I caught Laura going through the filing cabinet. She jumped when I entered the room. Oh, she said quickly. I was just organising your documents. You two are such a mess with paperwork. I smiled faintly and said, That's kind of you. But I noticed she'd left the drawer for the house deed open. Later that evening, Frank found the new file labelled Property Adjustments. Inside were drafts of contracts typed neatly, but none in her handwriting. I didn't need to ask where they came from. The tension grew thicker every day. Even the air in the house felt charged, like static before a lightning strike. Laura began staying home more often. She'd cook dinner, pour wine, laugh too much at nothing. One night she brought out a photo album again, this time one from after Daniel's death. We've come a long way, haven't we? She said softly. I'm just trying to make things right. Frank didn't answer. She sighed. You never forgave me, did you? His eyes narrowed. For what? She hesitated, then smiled again, too brightly. For moving away after Daniel died. You thought I abandoned you. Frank stared at her like he was trying to see through her. Is that what you think this is about? I know you blame me, she said. But I loved him too. Her voice cracked perfectly. Maybe too perfectly. When she left the room, Frank whispered, She's practicing. The next morning, we got a call from Albert's office. Mr. Moore, the secretary said, just confirming the change your daughter requested, adding her full control over the estate as primary executor. Frank's face went pale. We didn't request anything. The secretary paused. Oh, she said you approved it yesterday. He hung up without saying another word. That night, he placed a sealed envelope inside the top drawer of his desk. If anything happens, he said, give this to Harriet. I asked what it was. He said, proof, just in case. Then he looked at me and added, don't sign anything else. I didn't, but I knew Laura wasn't finished asking. The envelope stayed in that drawer like a secret heartbeat. Frank didn't talk about it, and I didn't ask. Every time I dusted the desk, I'd see the edge of it under the paperwork, just enough to remind me that our family wasn't as whole as it looked from the outside. Laura was getting bolder. She'd started walking around the house like it was hers, rearranging furniture, changing the thermostat, even deciding what we should eat for dinner. "You two need more routine," she said one morning, setting out vitamins and bottles of water like she was our nurse. "Structure keeps old people healthy." Frank muttered, "So does minding your own business." She laughed, but there was tension behind it. You could feel it in the air, thin, sharp, always there. The days blurred together after that. Laura kept pushing her plans. Home renovation quotes, life insurance pamphlets, and something she called long-term care options. She handed me a glossy brochure that said peace of mind for seniors. "Laura," I said carefully, "we're not dying yet." She smiled, calm and pleasant. "Of course not. I just like to be prepared." Frank kept pretending to ignore her, but I knew he was watching everything. He checked the mail before she did, double-counted the cash in the safe, and wrote down every date she mentioned the will. It was around that time I started noticing her late-night phone calls. The house was quiet, but the sound carried, her voice low, urgent, sometimes angry. Once I heard her say, "It's almost done. Just trust me." When I asked her about it the next day, she said she'd been talking to her co-worker about a project. Frank didn't buy it. That evening, he sat me down with a look that made my stomach twist. "I've been thinking about Daniel again," he said quietly, "about the night he died." My heart dropped. "Why now?" "Because she's acting the same way she did back then," he said. "You don't see it?" I didn't want to answer, but I did remember. The night Daniel died, Laura had come home different, hollow-eyed, defensive, snapping at every question. She'd said they'd been hiking, that he slipped. No one saw. No one ever does. Frank rubbed his forehead. "I can't prove anything, but I think Daniel something out about her. Maybe money, maybe the same thing she's doing now." "That's a terrible thing to say," I whispered, but my voice shook. He looked at me, calm and steady. "It's a terrible thing to be right about." That night, I dreamed again about Daniel. He was standing by the edge of a cliff, looking back at me. His face wasn't angry. It was sad, like he knew I wasn't ready to listen. The next morning, Laura made pancakes. "You two look exhausted," she said cheerfully. "You need to relax. I've been thinking a little weekend trip might be good for us. Get some fresh air, take photos, maybe go up to the lake." Frank raised an eyebrow. "What lake?" "Maple Hollow," she said. "You used to take us there when we were kids. The view is gorgeous this time of year." My chest tightened. Maple Hollow was only 20 miles from Silver Ridge, where Daniel died. Frank didn't respond, just kept sipping his coffee. She grinned. "Come on, Dad, it'll be fun. We'll pack lunch, take the camera, make it a family thing." "Family thing," he repeated like he was tasting the words. The rest of that day passed with uneasy silence. Frank spent most of it in the garage working on something he wouldn't let me see. Every now and then I'd hear the sound of wood being cut, the faint hum of the sander, and then silence again. That evening, he came inside with a small black box. "If we're going," he said quietly, "we're not going blind." He showed me a small voice recorder. "We'll keep it running the whole trip, hidden in my jacket." I stared at him. "Frank, that's paranoid?" "Yeah," he said, "but paranoia keeps you breathing when love gets dangerous." I didn't argue. Deep down, something in me agreed. The following morning, Laura was bright and chipper again, as if she'd just won something. She brought pastries, helped pack the cooler, even made a playlist for the car. "We'll make new memories," she said, giving me a little side hug. "You'll see." Frank said nothing. As she loaded the bags into the trunk, I noticed her backpack. It looked new, heavier than usual. She caught me staring and said, "Just snacks and a first aid kit." I smiled faintly. "You've thought of everything." She winked. "Always do." The drive started out normal enough. The trees blurred by, sunlight flickered through the windows, and for a moment it almost felt like old times. But Frank's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile. Halfway there, Laura leaned forward from the back seat. "Oh, I forgot to mention. I talked to Albert again. He said everything with the will is squared away now. You two are completely taken care of." Frank glanced at me, his jaw stiff. "That's funny," he said evenly, "because Albert called me this morning. He said he hasn't heard from you in over a week. Laura froze, then forced a laugh. Oh, he must have meant his assistant. I was talking to her. Frank didn't respond. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At the lake, Laura insisted on setting up a picnic near the overlook. The wind was sharp, the air colder than I expected. She smiled and took out her phone. Let's get a picture together. I'll send it to the kids. Frank's eyes met mine. I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. The view was beautiful. Yes, but it looked a lot like Silver Ridge. I smiled for the photo anyway, my hands trembling just enough for her not to notice. She handed me a sandwich and said, "See, isn't this nice?" Frank nodded slowly. Yeah, almost too nice. The sky darkened slightly, clouds gathering near the ridge line. Laura laughed, maybe too loud. You two need to stop being so serious all the time. You act like I'm trying to kill you. The words hung in the air, half joke, half confession. Frank smiled thinly. We'll keep that in mind. She laughed again, but I saw her eyes flicker down to his jacket pocket. Frank didn't move. He just held my hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on my palm like a quiet signal. And that's when I realized the recorder wasn't just running. It was capturing every word that mattered. The wind off Maple Hollow carried that thin metallic chill that makes you feel like something's coming. Laura was pacing near the picnic table, pretending to check her phone for reception, while Frank sat perfectly still, his jacket zipped high, recorder on, eyes sharp. I kept telling myself we were imagining things, but the air between them was thick enough to cut. On the drive home, she hummed to herself, tapping on the window like a teenager. Halfway through the ride, she said casually, "We should do that again next weekend. Maybe go up to the mountains. I found this spot online called Deer Ridge. The trails look amazing." Frank didn't take his eyes off the road. "We're not exactly hikers, Laura," she smiled. "Oh, it's an easy trail. Even kids can do it." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. When we got home, she started packing up leftovers and humming that same tune. Frank leaned toward me and whispered, "She's setting it up." I wanted to believe he was wrong. I really did. The next morning, Laura was up early, making breakfast like nothing had happened. "I already checked the forecast," she said cheerfully. "Next Saturday's perfect. Mild weather, clear skies, not too crowded." I asked why she was so eager for another trip. She laughed. "You two need adventure. Besides, it's been forever since we took family photos." The word photos hit me like a stone. It sounded too familiar, too planned. Frank pushed back his chair. "We'll think about it," he said. She nodded, unconcerned. "Don't think too long. I already reserved the cabin." That's when I knew he was right. Later that day, he went out to the garage again. When he came back, he had his phone in his hand and a look that could burn through steel. "I called Albert," he said. "He confirmed something. She tried to file a request to transfer executor rights. Again, said we verbally approved it." I felt dizzy. "But she can't do that." "She can if we're dead," he said flatly. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For the rest of the week, we acted normal. We smiled when she came home, nodded when she talked about hiking gear, and agreed when she said she'd bring her camera. But behind closed doors, Frank and I were making plans of our own. He showed me the recorder and said, "This time we'll hide it in the backpack. If she says anything, we'll have it." I nodded, my hands trembling. "And if she doesn't?" He didn't answer. By Friday night, everything was ready. Laura came home with new hiking boots and a bright yellow jacket. "I got us all matching ones," she said, holding them up like prizes. "So cute for pictures." Frank smiled faintly. "You think of everything." She winked. "That's why I'm the favourite." I laughed, but inside I felt sick. The sound of her laughter filled the kitchen like smoke, sweet at first, but suffocating once it lingered too long. That night, after she went to bed, Frank handed me an envelope. "If something happens," he said, "you give this to Harriet." I started to protest, but he shook his head. I wrote everything down. The missing money, the new will, the trip, everything. "If we don't make it back, she'll know what to do." I stared at him. "You really think she'd—" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." The next morning came too fast. Laura was already up, humming while she packed sandwiches and water bottles. "You two ready for your big adventure?" she asked. Frank forced a smile. "You bet." The drive to Deer Ridge was quiet except for the music. Laura sang along to the radio, cheerful and relaxed, like this was a normal family outing. I stared out the window, counting trees just to keep my mind from racing. When we reached the trailhead, the sun was bright, but the air was cold. The parking lot was nearly empty, just one other car in the corner. Laura hopped out first, stretching her arms. Perfect day, huh? Frank nodded, slipping the recorder into the side pocket of his jacket. Couldn't ask for better. We started walking. The trail wound through tall pines, the sound of gravel crunching under our shoes. Laura talked the whole time about the view, about how peaceful it was, about how this hike would recharge our souls. Halfway up, she stopped and pointed toward a steep path that split off from the main trail. This way, she said. It's a shortcut to the overlook. Frank looked at the sign. Doesn't say it's a trail, she shrugged. Locals use it all the time. I saw it online. The incline was rough, the rocks loose underfoot. My heart pounded with every step. I wanted to turn back, but Laura kept smiling, encouraging, like a tour guide who already knew the destination. At one point I slipped, and she reached out quickly to steady me. Careful, Mom, she said softly. We wouldn't want an accident. Frank's jaw tightened. When we reached the top, the view opened wide, a stretch of forest and river below, sunlight bouncing off the water. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was the weight of open space and how close the edge really was. Come on, Laura said. Let's take a picture together. Frank hesitated. Maybe we should sit first. Catch our breath. She smiled. You can rest after. I want this one in the light. She set the camera on a tripod, adjusting it like she'd done it 100 times. Okay, Mom, stand right there. Dad, a little closer to her. That's it. I stepped where she pointed, too close to the edge. The wind rushed up from the gorge, cold and sharp. My pulse was loud in my ears. Frank glanced at me, then at Laura. She lifted the camera and said, Smile. The flash went off, and for a split second, everything was still. Then she lowered the camera and took one step forward. You two really should have trusted me, she said quietly. Before I could move, Frank grabbed my arm, his voice low. Don't step back. Laura's smile widened. Why not? Frank's hand tightened. Because you've already fallen once, Laura. You just don't know it yet. Her expression flickered just for a second, but enough for me to see it. Guilt, fear, and something darker, something that looked like satisfaction. The camera clicked again, catching all three of us in the frame. One smiling, one glaring, one frozen between them, too afraid to breathe. Frank reached into his pocket and adjusted the recorder. The tiny red light blinked twice. Laura didn't notice. She just said, softly, It's a beautiful view, isn't it? I nodded, pretending to agree, while the wind carried her words down into the gorge, where Daniel's voice once disappeared. The wind howled harder up there, sharp enough to sting my eyes. Laura was smiling for the camera, but her eyes weren't on us. They were studying the edge. She adjusted her footing, pretending to steady the tripod, and said lightly, Let's take one more. The last one didn't catch the sunlight right. Frank's grip on my arm tightened. I didn't move. My pulse was pounding so loud that I could hear it echoing inside my head. Laura walked closer, camera still in her hand. I used to love this place when I was a kid, she said. You and Dad always seemed so happy here. Guess things change. Frank's jaw flexed. They change when people do. Her smile twitched just for a second, then snapped back into place. Come on, Dad. Smile for once. Let's make this a memory. She raised the camera. For a heartbeat, it looked like she might actually take a picture. Then her free hand shot out and shoved at Frank's shoulder. Quick, strong, deliberate. He stumbled backward, dragging me with him. The ground slipped out from under us. The world flipped, and then everything was noise. Wind, rocks, my own scream tearing through the air. We hit hard. The sound of it cracked through my skull, then nothing but ringing. My body was screaming, but my voice wouldn't work. I tried to breathe and tasted dirt and blood. Beside me, Frank's hand twitched. His voice came out a rasp, barely a whisper. Don't move, Helen. Play dead. I wanted to answer, to tell him I couldn't move even if I wanted to, but my throat wouldn't work. I just nodded slightly, my head heavy against the ground. Above us, I heard footsteps sliding down loose rock. Then Laura's voice, sharp with panic but wrong somehow. Too high, too practiced. Mom? Dad? Are you? Oh my God! Her breathing was loud, Fast, but not the way someone terrified would breathe. More like someone checking to see if the stage was set right. I stayed still. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to run, but Frank's hand squeezed mine weakly, a warning. After a few seconds, Laura's tone changed. She wasn't calling anymore. She was talking, to herself or maybe to someone else. "It worked," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "It actually worked." Frank's eyes flicked open just enough to meet mine. His look said everything. We're still alive. I could hear her pacing above us, small rocks tumbling as she moved. Okay, she muttered. "You just have to make it look right. Take pictures, cry, say it was an accident." There was a click. Her camera. Then another. A few feet away, Frank shifted his weight slightly, grimacing from pain. I could see blood on his sleeve, dark and sticky. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "Recorder's still on." Laura's voice came closer. "Mom? Dad," she called again, softer now. "Can you hear me? Oh God, what have I done?" Her sobs were too clean, too rhythmic. She'd rehearsed this. I kept my eyes half closing, slow and shallow. She crouched next to me. I could feel her shadow fall over my face. Her perfume was sweet and nauseating. She leaned close enough for me to hear the faint click of her camera again. Then, in a whisper that sliced right through me, she said, "You should have just signed the papers, Mom." Frank's hand twitched, just barely, but she didn't notice. She stood up, exhaled shakily and said, all right, just call it in now." Her footsteps moved away and I heard her voice louder, trembling on command. "Help! Somebody! My parents fell! Oh God, please help!" Her cries echoed off the rocks, fading into the distance. When the sound of her voice was finally gone, Frank coughed, wet and painful. "You okay?" he rasped. I turned my head slightly. Every inch of me hurt, but I was breathing. "I think so." He looked up the cliff, squinting against the sunlight. "We're alive?" "She doesn't know." Blood ran down the side of his face, but he was focused, scanning the ground around him. His hand found the recorder, still flashing faintly red. "We've got her voice," he said. The relief hit me like a wave, and then the pain followed. My ribs burned with every breath, my arm throbbed. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded. "Not yet. She'll be back. We wait." The minutes dragged like hours. I could hear birds somewhere above, the wind whistling through the trees, and faintly, Laura's voice again. Closer this time, talking to someone. "They fell," she was saying. "It was horrible. I tried to grab them, but—" A man's voice interrupted, low and hesitant. "Are you sure you shouldn't call the police?" "I did," she said quickly. "They're on their way. Just help me find a path down." Frank's grip tightened on my hand. "She brought someone," he whispered. I held my breath. The sound of their steps crunched over loose gravel above us. I could see small pebbles raining down. Then the man said, "Wait, what's that down there?" Laura's voice was sharper now. "Don't look! It's just stay up there!" The tone was enough to confirm what we both already knew. She didn't want anyone to see us yet. After a moment, her voice softened again. "Please, just wait. I'll go down. I need to say goodbye." The man didn't argue. Footsteps, more pebbles falling. Then silence. I kept my breathing shallow as her steps approached. She was talking again, but not to us, this time to herself. "They should have stayed out of it. They were never supposed to find out." She crouched again beside Frank. I could see her shadow bend over him. "You shouldn't have told her about Daniel," she whispered. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" Frank's body tensed, but he didn't move. "Now look what you made me do," she said softly. Her fingers brushed against his jacket, probably checking for a pulse. She lingered for a second, then pulled back. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her voice low, "but you left me no choice." Then she stood, and I heard her footsteps climb again, steady and calm. Frank exhaled slowly, finally opening his eyes. "We have everything," he murmured. Her voice, her confession. I could barely think past the pain, but I knew he was right. Above us, Laura's voice echoed again, perfectly broken now, perfectly believable. "They're gone! Please, someone help me! They're gone!" And as the sound of sirens began to rise faintly in the distance, Frank looked at me with a grim smile and whispered, "Then let's make sure she's wrong." Frank's whisper still rang in my ears when the sirens grew louder, climbing up through the trees like ghosts. My whole body throbbed, every breath stabbing my ribs, but I didn't move. Frank squeezed my hand once, enough to tell me to stay still. Voices echoed from above. "Over here! "There's movement down there," a man shouted. Another answered, "We've got one survivor already, the daughter." "She's in shock." Shock, I almost laughed, if they only knew. Laura's voice came next. Loud, broken, believable. "Please hurry, they fell! They fell right over the edge." Her performance could have won awards. Every cry, every breath was perfect. But now I knew what she sounded like when she lied. The tone had a rhythm, a smooth, rehearsed tremble that didn't crack in the right places. Frank's lips barely moved. "They'll think we're dead. Keep still. The recorder's still running." My eyes stayed closed. The world felt distant, muffled. I heard boots crunching on the gravel above, the clinking of carabiners, the thud of ropes hitting the ground. Then the faint whir of a helicopter. "We're coming down," one of the rescuers yelled. Frank pressed his head against the dirt, pretending to be unconscious again. The air filled with movement, ropes sliding, men grunting as they descended. One landed close to me. I could hear the heavy gear shift against his vest. "Female victim here," he called. Weak pulse, breathing shallow. He leaned close enough that I felt his breath on my cheek. "Hang in there, ma'am. We've got you." He started checking my injuries, careful and efficient. I wanted to open my eyes to tell him the truth, that the killer was right above us, but Frank's voice, my head stopped me. "Play dead." A few feet away I heard another rescuer. "Male victim here, pulse present but faint. We need stretchers down now." Frank groaned softly, just enough to sound half-conscious. The rescuer called for backup. For backup, his voice cutting through the noise of the rotor blades. "Get the daughter ready to go first," someone yelled from above. Laura's answer came in fast. "No, please! Help my parents first! They need it more!" I could picture the tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks, the way her hand probably covered her mouth for effect. She was good. Too good. Minutes later, ropes tightened around us, hands securing straps, clips locking into place. I felt them lift me gently, the motion jarring enough to make pain flare through every bone. I gritted my teeth but didn't make a sound. "Vital signs are holding," someone said. "Let's move." As they hoisted us up the cliff, the wind grew louder. The world tilted, swaying in the harness until sunlight hit my face again. When I reached the top, I could hear her clearly now, Laura sobbing near the edge, her voice cracking just right. "I told them to be careful," she wailed. "It was supposed to be a family trip." "Ma'am, please step back," an officer said gently. "We're bringing them up now." Frank was next. When they laid him beside me, I felt the faint squeeze of his fingers against my hand. Still alive, still pretending. The paramedics worked fast, strapping monitors to our chests, wrapping our limbs. I could hear one of them mutter, "They're both in bad shape, but they've got a chance." Laura gasped loudly, "They're alive? Oh my God, thank you!" Her words hit me harder than the fall. There was genuine relief in her voice, relief that she now had to improvise. A paramedic leaned over me. "Ma'am, if you can hear me, don't try to talk. We're taking you to the hospital." I blinked slowly just once, enough for him to see, not enough for her. They loaded us into the helicopter. I could feel Frank beside me, silent and steady. The noise inside was deafening, the vibration rattling through my bones. Laura sat opposite us, strapped in, head down like a grieving daughter. Every few seconds she'd lift her face, wipe her eyes, and look at us with perfect heartbreak. I forced myself to look past her, to the paramedic sitting near the door. His face was focused, calm. I needed him to see me, to understand something wasn't right. When he leaned in to check my vitals again, I moved my finger, just once, then twice. His brow furrowed, he whispered, "Can you hear me?" I moved my finger again, 3 slow taps. His eyes widened slightly. He nodded, understanding. I don't know if Frank saw, but I knew then we weren't alone anymore. The rest of the flight blurred. The pounding of the rotor, the pain, Laura's quiet sobbing, it all melted together. When we landed, floodlights hit my face. They rolled us into the ER, shouting medical terms I couldn't process. I caught glimpses, white coats, surgical masks, the blur of movement. Then I heard her again. "Please, doctor, tell me they'll be okay." The doctor's voice was calm. "They're critical but stable. We need to work now." Laura's sobs broke again, timed perfectly. "Can I see them?" "Not yet," the nurse replied. "We'll let you know." They wheeled me into a separate room. The nurse checking my IV glanced down at me. It was the same paramedic from the helicopter. His name tag read, Ian. He leaned close, pretending to adjust my mask. "If you're in danger, blink twice." I blinked twice. He nodded slightly. "I'll tell the doctor." He turned, calm as ever, and stepped out. A few seconds later, I heard hushed voices outside the curtain. Then another man entered, older, grey-haired, probably the attending physician. He spoke softly. "Mrs. Gray, you're safe here. We understand something may have happened. Just hold on. You don't have to speak." I blinked once. "Good," he said. "Help is coming." Through the thin hospital curtain, I could hear Laura again talking to an officer. "They slipped," she said, her voice trembling. "It all happened so fast, I tried to grab them." The officer's tone was sympathetic. "It must have been horrible for you." "It was," she said. "I'll never forgive myself." Her words floated through the air like poison dressed as perfume. Ian returned with a clipboard. "We'll need to move her to intensive care," he said to the others, but I caught the quick glance he threw at the curtain, toward the voice of the woman who'd just tried to kill us. When they wheeled me down the hallway, I could finally see Frank again through the open door of the next room. He looked pale, weak, but alive. Our eyes met briefly before a nurse closed the door between us. Laura's voice followed us down the hall, soft and sweet. "Thank you for saving them," she told the staff. "They mean everything to me." Ian whispered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "Not anymore, she doesn't." Hospitals always smell the same, a mix of bleach and fear. The lights were too bright, the beeping too steady. I couldn't move my arm without pain shooting up my side, but I was alive. That fact alone felt suspicious. Frank was somewhere down the hall. I could hear faint voices, doctors giving updates, nurses rushing. My room was quieter, too quiet, until I heard the soft click of heels on the linoleum floor. A young nurse stepped in. Her name tag read Lynn. She was small, serious, with a calmness that didn't match the chaos outside. She checked my vitals, then leaned close and whispered, "Ian told me. You're safe now. Just keep still." I blinked once in response. She nodded slightly. "Your daughter's outside. She's talking to the police." I wanted to tell her everything about Daniel, the will, the push, but all I could do was stare. Lynn adjusted my IV, her movements quick but gentle. "If you can't talk yet," she said softly, "I'll listen." Footsteps approached from the hallway. Laura's voice came next, trembling just enough to sound believable. "Can I see her? Please, I just need to see my mom." Lynn straightened. "Only for a few minutes," she said, professional but firm. "She's still critical." Laura came in quietly, eyes red, face pale. She looked at me the way a good actress looks at her audience, reading the room before her next line. "Oh, Mom," she said, taking my hand. Her skin was warm, her grip soft, but underneath it there was no hesitation. "You scared me half to death." I didn't react. I couldn't. She brushed my hair away from my forehead like she used to when I was sick as a child. "The doctor said you might wake up soon. I just wanted to tell you. I love you." It sounded like a confession, but not the kind that makes things right. Then she leaned closer, her breath tickling my ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. "You should have stayed quiet about Daniel." Lynn froze mid-step, her back turned to us, but her posture tense. I felt my pulse spike under Laura's hand. Laura smiled faintly, still whispering, "I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but you forced my hand." Her thumb stroked my knuckles like she was soothing me, but her words cut deep. "You'll understand one day, everything I did was for the family." Lynn cleared her throat suddenly, her voice calm but cold. "Visiting time's over." Laura straightened, her smile softening into something innocent. "Of course, I'll be right outside, Mom. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything." When she left, Lynn stood frozen for a second, then turned toward me. Her eyes were wide, the colour drained from her face. "I heard that," she whispered. "I heard every word. I blinked twice." "Yes." She pressed her lips together, thinking fast. "Don't move. I'm going to get someone you can trust." Before I could blink again, she slipped out of the room. The door clicked shut behind her. The next few minutes felt endless. I could hear Laura in the hallway, laughing softly now, probably talking to the officers, spinning her story like silk. Then new footsteps, heavier. A man's voice, calm, authoritative. "Detective Johnson, ma'am. I just need to confirm some details." Laura's tone turned delicate, tearful again. "Of course, I'll do anything to help." I couldn't see them, but I could picture it perfectly, her hand clutching a tissue, her eyes darting just enough to seem fragile. A few moments later, the door opened again. Lynn returned, followed by a tall man in plain clothes. His badge flashed under the fluorescent light. "Mrs. Gray," he said quietly, "I'm Detective Johnson. Nurse Lynn here told me there might be something you want to share." I blinked once, then twice. He moved closer. "If you can understand me, blink twice for yes." I did. "Good," he said, glancing toward the doorway before lowering his voice. "Your daughter's outside. I've asked her to wait." He took out a small notebook. "Can you tell me what happened?" I blinked once. "No, not yet." Lynn leaned in. "She can't speak yet, but she's aware." Johnson nodded. "Then we'll start simple. Do you believe your daughter was responsible for what happened on that mountain?" I blinked twice. Lynn's breath caught. Johnson's face hardened. "Okay," he said, voice quiet but steady. "We'll need evidence. Something solid. Is there any proof?" I blinked twice again, slow and deliberate. He raised an eyebrow. "Do you know where it is?" I blinked once. Then, after a pause, twice. Johnson looked at Lynn. "Her husband, he was brought in with her, right?" "Yes," Lynn said quickly. "Room 312. "Good. If he's conscious, he might have the rest." He turned back to me. "Don't worry, Mrs. Gray. We're going to handle this carefully." Just then, the door creaked open again. Laura's voice slid through, syrupy and sweet. "Detective, is everything okay? Is my mother awake?" Johnson straightened instantly. "She's resting. I'll let you know when she can speak." Laura smiled faintly. "Of course, I need to check on my dad too. He's in 312, right?" Lynn's face went pale. Johnson's tone didn't waver. "He's still sedated. You'll have to wait until the doctor clears it." Laura hesitated. "Right, of course." When the door closed again, Johnson turned back to me. "She doesn't know we're on to her," he said quietly. "That's good." Lynn adjusted my blanket, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll protect you, Mrs. Gray. You just stay still." Through the half-open curtain, I caught a glimpse of Laura walking down the hall. She stopped by the nurse's station, smiled sweetly at someone, and leaned in to talk. Even from here, I could see the shift, the way her expression hardened the moment no one was looking. Johnson followed my gaze. She's playing innocent now, but that never lasts. Lynn took my pulse again, her hands trembling slightly. "We should keep her away from Mrs. Gray," she said. Johnson nodded. "Already working on it." But as the detective stepped out to make his call, Laura glanced back toward my room. Her eyes met mine through the small gap in the curtain. Calm, dark, calculating. She smiled. Just once. And in that small, terrible moment, I realized she wasn't afraid of being caught. She was afraid we might live long enough to tell. By morning, the world outside my hospital window looked too calm for what had happened. The sky was pale, the sun already high, and everything smelled like antiseptic and coffee. My body still ached, but I could move my hand enough to press the nurse call button. Lynn came right away, her face tight with exhaustion. "She's still here," she whispered. "Your daughter hasn't left the building, but Detective Johnson brought in a tech team. They're checking your husband's belongings." I felt my pulse jump. Frank's jacket, the recorder. Lynn smiled slightly. "If it's there, they'll find it." Minutes later, I heard quick footsteps in the hallway and Johnson's voice. "It's on the phone." Audio file, timestamp matches the day of the incident. He walked in holding a small tablet, his tone low and controlled. "Mrs. Gray, we have something. I think you'll want to hear this." He hit play. At first there was only wind and shuffling, the kind of static that fills the air on a mountain. Then came Laura's voice, clear, calm, deadly. "You two really should have trusted me," she said. Then Frank's voice, steady even then, "Don't step back." There was a pause, a scuffle, the sound of gravel shifting, and then the words that froze the room. "You should have just signed the papers, Mom." Lynn's hand flew to her mouth. Johnson's expression hardened. He hit pause. "That's enough," I whispered, my voice cracking through the oxygen mask. But he didn't stop. He played the rest, the sound of her crying, fake and perfect, the way she called for help like she was in pain. Then, faintly, Frank's whisper, "Recorder's still on." When the audio ended, Johnson said quietly, "This is more than enough to open an investigation, but we'll need to move carefully. If she suspects we have this, she'll disappear before we can arrest her." Lynn spoke up. "She asked about room 312 last night. I think she's planning something." Johnson nodded. "I figured as much. She'll try to finish what she started." I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the pain. "You can't let her near him." "You have my word," he said. But words didn't mean much anymore. Later that afternoon, I watched from my bed as a police officer stationed himself outside the door. Every time the elevator dinged, my heart jumped. I expected her to walk through it at any moment, smiling, holding coffee, pretending to care. When Lynn came by to check on me, I asked, "How's Frank?" She hesitated. "Stable. Weak, but talking." "Can I see him?" She shook her head. "Not yet. The detective's with him. They're verifying the recording's origin." For the first time in days, I felt something close to hope. A few hours later, Johnson returned. He looked different now, more sure, more resolved. "Mrs. Gray," he said, "we confirmed it. The device belongs to your husband. The metadata lines up. Your daughter's voice is unmistakable." He paused before adding, "We also found older files on the same recorder, voice notes from the week before the trip. Your husband must have been documenting everything." He scrolled through his notes. "There's one from 3 nights before the fall." He says, and I'm quoting, "If something happens to us, it won't be an accident. Laura's been pushing too hard. I think she's hiding financial trouble." Hearing Frank's voice through someone else's words made my chest ache. Johnson continued, "We ran a background check on her. She's been moving large amounts of money through multiple accounts. There's debt, credit cards, personal loans, even a lien on her car. Close to $100,000. Lynn exhaled softly. "So she was desperate." "Desperate," Johnson agreed, "and clever. She'd been transferring money out of your joint accounts for months, creating a paper trail that made it look like you approved it." I closed my eyes. "She killed her brother for the same reason." Johnson looked at me sharply. "You're saying the other death, Daniel's, wasn't an accident?" I nodded slowly. "Frank told me everything. He saw them fighting near the ridge that night. He said she pushed him. They covered it up as an accident." Johnson leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" "Only what's in that recording," I said. "When she said, 'You should have stayed quiet about Daniel,' that was her admitting it." He didn't argue. He just nodded, grim and focused. "Then she's not walking out of this hospital." A few minutes later, he stepped out to make a call. Lynn stayed, her voice low and reassuring. "They'll take her into custody quietly. You won't have to see her again." But as soon as she said it, a noise came from the hallway, a soft knock, then a familiar voice. "Mom? It's me. They said I could visit for a minute." Lynn froze. Johnson was still gone. The officer outside must have stepped away from the door. Laura's voice came again, softer this time. "I just want to see you, Mom, please." I didn't move. Lynn glanced toward the doorway, whispering, "She shouldn't be here." She started toward the hall, but before she could reach it, the door opened. Laura stood there, holding a paper cup of coffee, wearing that same sweet, calculated smile. "You look better," she said cheerfully. "I brought you your favourite, hazelnut." Lynn stepped between us. "Miss, you're not supposed to be here." Laura's tone stayed calm. "Oh, it's fine. The officer said I could. He just stepped away for a second." Lynn didn't move. "Visiting hours are over." Laura's eyes flicked to me. "Mom, you know I'd never hurt you, right?" Her voice softened, trembling just enough to sound fragile. "They're saying awful things about me. Lies. I'd never hurt you or Dad." I said nothing. Her smile slipped for half a second. "You believe me, don't you?" The room was too quiet. Then Johnson's voice came from the doorway behind her. "Actually, Laura, I think you've said enough." She turned, startled, but before she could speak, 2 uniformed officers stepped in. "Laura Gray," Johnson said evenly, "you're under arrest for attempted murder and financial fraud." She froze. For a moment her face went blank. No panic, no denial, just an eerie stillness. Then she laughed softly. "You have no proof." Johnson raised the recorder. "We do." The smile disappeared. The officers took her by the arms. She didn't resist, didn't look at me, didn't speak another word. As they led her away, the only sound left in the room was the steady beeping of the monitor and the faint hum of the hospital lights. Lynn touched my shoulder. "It's over," she said quietly. "You're safe now." But I didn't feel safe, because I knew what came after an arrest. Lawyers, stories and lies that could twist the truth all over again. And I wasn't ready to let anyone else tell mine. The day after Laura's arrest, the hospital felt different. Less like a place of healing and more like a crime scene that hadn't realised the show was over. Nurses whispered as they passed my door. Reporters waited outside the main entrance. Everyone wanted to know how a daughter could try to kill her parents over money. Detective Johnson came in early, his suit still wrinkled from the night before. "We've already transferred her to county," he said quietly. "She's not talking, but she's listening to her lawyer. That tells me she knows she's cornered." I nodded slowly, staring at the cup of cold coffee on my tray. "Frank? He's stable," Johnson said. "Awake, asking about you." Lynn smiled faintly from the corner of the room. "He's been giving the nurses a hard time," she said. "That's how you know he's getting better." I almost laughed. Almost. Johnson sat down by the bed. "We also recovered her phone. There are texts, messages with someone she owed money to. It's bad. She was deep in debt, gambling mostly. Online markets, crypto schemes, the works." I swallowed hard. "So that's what it was all for?" "Money," he said simply. "Always is." He leaned forward. "But there's something else. One of the messages mentions your son, Daniel. She told someone I should have handled things the same way I did with my brother." My throat went dry. "We're reopening that case," he said. Silver Ridge was ruled accidental at the time, but now we know better. Lynn shifted uncomfortably. "Do you think she really—" Johnson nodded once. "The note in Daniel's journal, the old insurance documents, her financial history, it all points to the same pattern. Manipulation, control, and when that failed, elimination." The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. He stood. "I'll need both of you to give official statements when you're strong enough. For now, rest. You've earned it." After he left, Lynn sat beside me, her voice soft. "You know, I've seen a lot of families fall apart over less, but what she did—" "She was my daughter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I raised her, I loved her, and she looked me in the eye and pushed us off a cliff." Lynn reached out, covering my hand gently. "Evil doesn't always come from strangers." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about every sign I'd ignored. The way she talked about the house, the will, even Daniel's death. I'd mistaken her ambition for care, her lies for attention, her cruelty for confidence. Around midnight, the door creaked open quietly. It was Frank, pale and slow, leaning on a walker. "You look like hell," he said with a half-smile. "So do you," I replied. He shuffled closer, the sound of his slippers soft against the tile. "They told me everything, the recording, the arrest, the press outside." "They're calling it a family tragedy," I said, like with some kind of cautionary tale. Frank sat beside me, exhaling deeply. "Maybe that's what we are." We sat there for a long time without talking. The machines beeped softly, marking time neither of us wanted to think about. Finally, Frank said, "I listened to the tape again." You can hear her smile in her voice. "I don't know how, but you can." I turned to him. "Do you regret recording it?" He shook his head. "I regret needing to." The next morning, a social worker came by with release paperwork. "You'll both be discharged in 2 days," she said politely. "But you might want to consider staying somewhere else for a while. Your home's still under investigation." Our house, the one Frank built with his hands, now marked with police tape and evidence tags. When she left, Frank looked out the window. "I don't care if they tear it down," he muttered. "I just want to know why." So did I. By afternoon, the media had the full story. I could hear the news playing faintly from another patient's TV down the hall. The daughter of local residents, Frank and Helen Gray, has been charged with attempted double homicide and financial fraud. Authorities believe this may be connected to the mysterious death of her brother, Daniel Gray, 15 years ago. The words barely sounded real. Lynn turned off the television in my room before I could hear more. "You don't need that noise." But I did. I needed to hear the world say her name, to acknowledge what she'd done, because for years we'd been living inside her lies. Later that day, Johnson returned with a folder under his arm. "There's one more thing," he said, closing the door behind him. "We traced her calls from the week before the fall. She contacted your insurance provider 3 separate times, pretending to be you. She tried to verify the payout terms." Frank clenched his jaw. "She was planning this for months," Johnson nodded. "Longer than that, I think. She'd been building a safety net, trying to make sure nothing pointed back to her." He paused. "But she slipped up." He pulled out a still image from a video file, a blurry frame from her camera. It showed her standing over us at the cliffside, holding the camera, her hand outstretched. Her face was half-shadowed, but her smile was unmistakable. "She recorded herself," he said. "We recovered it from the SD card. Frank stared at the photo, his voice low. She filmed the whole thing. Johnson nodded. We'll use it in court. When he left, I just sat there, staring at the picture. It didn't look like my daughter anymore. It looked like a stranger wearing her face. Frank reached for my hand. She's gone, Helen, he said quietly. The person we knew, she's been gone a long time. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on that picture, the frozen smile, the moment before everything shattered. Outside the window, the sun began to set over the city. The light turned gold, then red, then disappeared altogether, leaving only the reflection of two tired, broken people sitting side by side in the glow of a hospital monitor. Frank squeezed my hand gently. We're still here, he said. That's what matters. For the first time in days, I nodded. But the truth was, survival didn't feel like victory. It just felt like another kind of sentence. When the trial began 3 months later, the town looked at us like we were exhibits. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, shoving microphones toward us as if tragedy were contagious. They called it the Maplewood family case. Some even said it was unthinkable, as if evil needed to come with a warning label. Frank and I sat side by side in the courtroom, our bodies still healing, our names now part of every news cycle. The seats behind us were packed with strangers who wanted to see a monster. None of them seemed to realize that for us, that monster had been a daughter. Laura walked in, escorted by 2 deputies, her wrists cuffed but her head high. She looked exactly the same as before, composed, polite, even graceful. When she turned and saw us, she smiled faintly. It wasn't warm or guilty, it was something colder, something practiced. The prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Denton, started with the basics, the recording, the photographs, the financial trail. Every piece of evidence felt like a wound being reopened. This wasn't a moment of panic, Rachel said to the jury. It was premeditated. Laura Gray built a plan designed to look like an accident. She studied her parents' insurance policies, forged their consent on key documents, and even rehearsed her own grief. The defense attorney, a young man with more confidence than conscience, stood up and smiled sympathetically at the jury. This was an accident, he said. A tragic misunderstanding between family members. Grief can make people see evil where there is only pain. I wanted to stand and shout. She pushed us, but my voice stayed locked behind my teeth. When the first recording played, the courtroom went silent. The sound of wind, footsteps, Laura's calm voice, then the shove. Her words, "You should have just signed the papers, Mom," echoed through the speakers. People in the gallery gasped. Even the judge looked shaken. The defense attorney tried to recover. "It's a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "She was upset. She didn't mean it literally." But then the recording continued, her crying, rehearsed and hollow. "Help! Somebody! My parents fell!" Rachel paused the tape. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not the voice of someone in shock. That's the voice of someone staging a scene. She turned toward Laura. "You took pictures, didn't you?" Laura didn't flinch. "I was panicking. I wanted proof for the rescuers." Rachel walked to the evidence table and lifted a printed photo. "You mean this one? The one where you're smiling over their bodies?" The image filled the courtroom screens. Gasps again. Someone in the back muttered a curse. Frank reached for my hand under the table, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Rachel's tone was firm but steady. "You weren't panicking. You were documenting." Laura didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead, the faint smile on her lips never wavering. The next day, the prosecution brought up Daniel's case. Photos from Silver Ridge, statements from witnesses, the old police report. Rachel laid them out piece by piece until the room felt suffocating. "This wasn't the first time someone in this family had an accident," she said. 15 years ago, Daniel Gray died under nearly identical circumstances, an unsupervised hike, no witnesses, and his sister as the only person present. The defense objected, claiming it was irrelevant, but the judge allowed it. When they showed Daniel's last journal entry, the one where he wrote, "Laura's been acting strange. She keeps asking about the will." I saw several jurors exchange glances. For the first time, Laura's composure cracked. Her lips pressed tight, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. Then Rachel played the second recording, the one from the hospital. Laura's whisper to me caught faintly on the background mic of a nurse's recorder. "You should have stayed quiet about Daniel." The sound was barely audible, but it was enough. The words hung in the air like smoke. Frank turned his head away. I couldn't. I watched my daughter's face as those words played back to her. She blinked slowly, swallowed, and smiled again. The defence made one last attempt. They brought in a psychologist who spoke for hours about childhood trauma, pressure, and unresolved guilt. He said Laura's actions were impulsive, not malicious. Rachel stood when he finished. "Doctor," she asked, "are you aware that Laura Gray had already researched her parents' life insurance 2 months before the incident?" He hesitated. "I wasn't." She nodded. "And are you aware she tried to move money out of their account the week before?" "No." "Then you're not describing impulse," Rachel said. "You're describing intent." The courtroom went silent again. When it was finally time for the verdict, the room felt heavy enough to crush us. The jury filed in, 12 faces that now held our future in their hands. The foreman stood. "On the charge of attempted double homicide, we find the defendant, Laura Gray, guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, guilty. On the charge of premeditated conspiracy to commit financial crime, guilty." The words didn't sound real. Laura didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just turned toward us, her face expressionless, and said softly, "You've ruined me." Frank stared back. "You did that yourself." The bailiffs led her away. Cameras flashed outside. People shouted questions we didn't answer. When we stepped into the sunlight, it was bright and blinding. Frank paused on the courthouse steps, breathing heavily, the weight of everything catching up with him. "You think it's over?" he asked quietly. I looked at the reporters, the cameras, the people who'd never know the quiet personal shape of our pain. "No," I said. "It's just quieter now." We drove home in silence. The house looked smaller, older, more fragile. Police tape still hung from the porch. Inside, dust had settled over everything. The air smelled like wood and memory. Frank sat on the old couch, rubbing his temples. "You know what's strange?" he said finally. "I still remember her as a little girl, holding Daniel's hand on that same porch." I looked around the room, the family photos, the worn furniture, the ghosts we'd let live here too long. "That little girl's been gone a long time," I said. He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "Then maybe it's time we let her rest." I didn't answer. I just reached for the envelope still tucked in my bag, the one Frank had sealed months ago, the one marked proof. It was creased, faded, but still intact. I placed it on the coffee table right beside the framed photo of our children. Frank glanced at it, then at me. "Leave it there," he said quietly. So I did. The house felt haunted, but not by ghosts, by memories that refused to stay quiet. After the trial, life didn't just go back to normal. It rearranged itself, like a broken puzzle missing half the pieces. The neighbours waved when they saw us, but their smiles carried that mix of pity and curiosity that made my stomach turn. Everyone in Maplewood knew what had happened, and they all had their own version of the story. Frank spent his days fixing things around the house that didn't need fixing. He'd patch cracks in the wall, oil the doors, tighten bolts that weren't loose. I think he just needed to prove he could still mend something, even if it wasn't us. One morning he called me into the kitchen. "Look at this," he said, holding a small envelope that had been taped to the bottom of an old drawer. Inside was a photograph. Daniel and Laura, both teenagers, standing on the porch. Daniel's arm was around her shoulders. They looked happy, normal. The photo was dated 2 weeks before Daniel's death. "She must have hidden it," Frank said quietly. She kept everything else about that night buried too." I stared at the photo. There was nothing evil in it, just 2 kids who hadn't yet learned what betrayal looked like. "I don't want to remember her this way," I said. Frank looked at me. "How do you want to remember her?" I didn't have an answer. The weeks passed slowly. Reporters stopped calling, and the letters from strangers dwindled. The ones who said they were praying for us or that they couldn't imagine what we'd been through. I didn't want their imagination. I wanted my family back. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I hesitated before opening it. A woman stood there, mid-30s, holding the hands of 2 small children. Her voice was soft. "Mrs. Gray, my name's Amy Turner. I'm with Child Services." Behind her, the 2 kids stared at me, Laura's children, my grandchildren. Amy smiled gently. "They've been staying in temporary care, but we wanted to ask if you and your husband would consider taking custody. You're their legal next of kin." Frank appeared behind me, his expression unreadable. Amy continued, They miss their parents, but they need stability, familiar faces. Familiar. The word felt heavy. Can we think about it? I asked quietly. Of course, she said. Take all the time you need. When she left, we stood in silence for a long moment. Frank finally spoke. They're innocent. I know, but they're hers, he added. I know that too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that same photograph, Daniel and Laura on the porch. I thought about those two little kids, how none of this was their fault. And I thought about what kind of story they'd grow up hearing if we weren't the ones to tell it. The next morning, I called Amy. We'll take them, I said, before I could change my mind. A week later, she returned with the children, a boy named Evan and a girl named Lila. They were polite, quiet, too careful for their age. Lila clutched a stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been through a war. Evan stood close behind her, watching everything with those sharp grey eyes that made my chest tighten. Frank knelt down to their level. "Hi there," he said softly. "You can call me Grandpa Frank." Lila nodded, eyes wide. Evan didn't say anything. That first night I made spaghetti, something simple, safe. The kids picked at their plates. Frank tried to lighten the mood, telling them about the bird feeder in the backyard and how the squirrels always tried to steal from it. At one point, Lila asked, "When can we see Mommy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Frank froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. I set mine down and forced a steady breath. "Your mom's in a place where people are helping her understand what she did," I said carefully. "It might take a while, but she loves you." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all they could handle. After dinner, I tucked them into the guest room. Evan was quiet, staring at the ceiling. "People at the shelter said my mom's bad," he said. "Is she?" I hesitated, then sat on the edge of his bed. "Sometimes people we love do bad things," I said, "but that doesn't mean we stop loving them." He looked at me, frowning. "Even if they hurt you?" "Yes," I said softly. "Even then." He didn't answer, but after a moment he closed his eyes. When I returned to the living room, Frank was standing by the window, looking out at the yard. "You think we can do this?" he asked quietly. I joined him. "We already are." The next few weeks were slow, careful. The kids started smiling more, sleeping better. Lila painted drawings for the fridge. Evan followed Frank into the workshop, asking questions about every tool. Sometimes when the house was quiet, I caught myself watching them and feeling something strange. Not joy exactly, but peace. Like maybe all that pain had finally found somewhere to go. One afternoon, Evan came running into the kitchen holding a piece of paper. "Grandma, look! It was a drawing of a family, 4 figures holding hands." "That's you," he said proudly, pointing to the one with the curly hair. "And that's Grandpa, and that's me and Lila," I smiled, even as my eyes burned. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Lila peeked from behind him. "You forgot Mommy," she said. Evan looked at the drawing again, then picked up a crayon and added a 5th figure standing a little apart from the rest. "She can still be there," he said. "Just not too close." I nodded. "That's perfect." Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Frank and I sat on the porch. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. "You notice something?" he said. "What?" They laughed the same way Daniel did when he was little. I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the universe's way of giving us a second chance." He nodded slowly, staring into the dark yard. "Maybe it's telling us we didn't lose everything after all." The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, the sound didn't remind me of that mountain. It just sounded like home. It's strange how silence can feel like a gift after you've lived with chaos for so long. Months passed after we took the kids in, and the noise that once filled our lives, sirens, reporters, courtrooms, faded into something softer. The mornings began with cereal bowls clinking, cartoons humming in the background, and the low hum of Frank's radio as he tinkered in the garage. For the first time in years, the house didn't sound like grief. It sounded like life. Still, every now and then, a letter from the prison would arrive. Always the same neat handwriting. Always signed Laura. I never opened them. I kept them in a drawer in the kitchen, right next to the batteries and the old screwdrivers. Frank never asked about them. We both knew that reading her words wouldn't change what had already been done. One Saturday morning, as I was making pancakes, Lila wandered in, still in her pajamas. "Grandma," she said, "Evan says Mommy's in a bad place. Is that true?" I turned off the stove, kneeling to her level. She's in a place where people help her understand her mistakes, I said gently. But she's safe, Lila frowned. Does she miss us? Yes, I said. I think about her every day. I'm sure she thinks about you too. The truth was, I didn't know what Laura thought about anymore. Guilt? Maybe. Or maybe she'd found a way to convince herself she was still the victim. Either way, that was her world now, not ours. Frank joined us at the table, his hair sticking up in all directions, looking more like the man I married than he had in years. Smells good, he said, pouring syrup on his plate. Lila grinned. Grandpa, Evan says you used to build big houses. Frank chuckled. I did, but now I just fix birdhouses and toy shelves, easier clients. Evan, sitting across from him, looked up from his plate. Can you show me how? Frank smiled and something in his face softened. Sure can, buddy. After breakfast. Watching them together felt like watching a wound finally start to close. There was no grand redemption, no perfect ending, just small, steady moments where everything stopped hurting for a while. Later that afternoon, as Frank and Evan worked in the garage, I sat on the porch, sorting through the mail. Among the bills and flyers was another letter from the prison. The envelope was thicker this time, heavier. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away unopened like the others. But something about it, maybe the weight, maybe the timing, made me pause. I opened it carefully. Inside were several folded pages written in Laura's handwriting, and a single photograph. Her children, younger, maybe 4 and 6, smiling in a park. She must have taken it years ago. The note started with one simple line. Mom, if you're reading this, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I almost stopped there, but my eyes kept moving. She wrote about the debts, the panic, how everything had spiraled after Daniel's death, how she'd convinced herself that she was owed something, that life had cheated her and she was just taking it back. She said she'd hated how calm we were, how we kept loving her even when she didn't love herself. And at the end, she wrote something that didn't sound like an excuse, but like an ending. I see Evan and Lila in my dreams. Please don't let them grow up thinking I was only what I became. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. For years I'd thought closure came from punishment, from justice. But reading that, I realised closure was quieter. It came from understanding how something broke, even if you couldn't fix it. When Frank came back inside, his hands dusty with sawdust, I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, saying nothing until he finished. Then he folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. She's still our daughter, he said. I know. That night, I tucked the letter in with the others, not to forget, but to remember on my own terms. Weeks later, the prison called. They said Laura wanted to list us as emergency guardians for the children in case anything happened to her. I didn't ask why. I just said yes. The seasons changed again. The kids started school, made friends, filled the house with noise and crayons and laughter that didn't carry guilt in it anymore. Frank built a swing in the backyard, and sometimes when the light hit just right, I'd catch the reflection of all of them. Frank pushing Lila, Evan running circles around them, and it felt like the kind of miracle ordinary people get. Not divine, just decent. One evening, Evan came into the kitchen holding one of my old photo albums. Grandma, he said, flipping to a page, who's this? It was a picture of Daniel, maybe 16, smiling with sawdust on his shirt. That's your uncle, I said softly. He was a good man. Evan nodded. He looks like Mom. Yes, I said. He really did. He closed the book carefully, like he knew it mattered. You think she misses him? I think she does now, I said. Sometimes people understand too late, but understanding still matters. He seemed to think about that, then went back outside. When the sun went down, Frank and I sat together on the porch again, listening to the cicadas. He looked over at me. You ever wonder what Daniel would have said about all this? I smiled faintly. Probably that we still argue too much. Frank laughed. Yeah, probably. The kids' laughter echoed from the yard. Evan had just pushed Lila too high on the swing, and she was screaming half in fear, half in delight. Frank started to stand, but I stopped him. Let them be, I said. They're learning balance. He sat back down. The stars came out one by one, soft and familiar. For the first time, the memories didn't sting. They just existed, part of us, but not all of us. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore, it was honest. And in that stillness, I realized justice had never really been about punishment. It was about survival, about what you build after everything's fallen apart, and who you choose to keep standing beside you when the dust finally settles. Sometimes revenge stories don't end with fire or screaming justice. They end with silence, and with the question of what love still means when it's been twisted beyond repair. My story isn't about hate, it's about survival. It's about learning that family can break you and still be part of who you are. I used to think forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. Now I know it just means not letting the past control the rest of your life. Frank still wakes up early every morning to make coffee, and the kids still argue over who gets the bigger pancake. Some days I catch myself watching them and thinking, maybe this is what real revenge looks like. Not anger, not bitterness, just peace. Living well after everything that tried to destroy you. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. Stories like this, family revenge stories, family drama, aren't just about the darkness people are capable of. They're about what it takes to climb out of it. If you want more stories like this, true, emotional, and painfully human, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Tell me what you think about forgiveness, justice, and what family really means when love turns dangerous. Your voice matters here.